why do you believe that science is possible given your denial of God?
What do you mean by science is possible?
Why do you believe it's possible to do science, to have scientific inquiry?
Well, science
use the
doesn't need God to do it. All it needs is
Why do you think it is?
basically a process, a methodology, and your senses. So you can argue that your senses come from God in some way. You can argue that, but you'd have to demonstrate that for me to believe it. Now,
Demonstrate it using science? Hold on.
I didn't get my question answered, which how does science presuppose God?
Oh, real quick, I was actually asking you a question. Remember? I was asking
And I
you
answered
what
it, yeah.
you said that science doesn't need God because all you
Right.
need is a process. I would say
Correct.
process. Right. So what is that process?
Scientific methodologies. There are a series of steps that we've basically used to try to eliminate biases and cognitive sort of problems from a methodology of finding out what is actually true in the world around us. It's also called methodological naturalism, that basically we start with the observations around us. We make these observations. We come up with questions. Those questions are put in the form of hypothesis. It's then subject to testing. Then replication is done by other people. Those things are published and other people replicate them as well. And then it goes back to raising more observations. And then we repeat that whole process again.
Okay, so to do that process, to engage in that
Yeah.
process, what are the assumptions or presuppositions that you must make before you engage in that process?
Probably, I mean, you have to have a naturalist start. Basically, that you know you use empiricism is one of the presuppositions that you would launch into.
Meaning what?
Well, that our senses around us are the only way to describe reality.
So you have to, okay, so that's interesting. So you believe you have to actually believe that all there is, the only way to gain truth is by using our senses. Okay, so
no.
Say
so
it again. I didn't mean to misunderstand.
It's local to the process of science. Okay,
yes,
so
yes.
you don't have to believe that. It just means in order to engage with science, you can't bring in anything that is not empirical. Right? You can't just say, well, in my mind, I've got a dragon. I'm going to bring that into science.
Except for that, though. Except for that.
Except for what?
Well, what you just expressed was not what you just expressed was an let's call it an ought statement. You can't bring in the supernatural beliefs. That is
right.
Right. So that itself is not. That is a normative statement that you are bringing into the scientific process. It's a presupposition. So that's not something that is gained by science. That's an a priori assumption that you're bringing to the scientific endeavor, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's good. So that's one. What are some of the other presuppositions? Like what would, like if I'm assuming that I can engage in scientific inquiry of the world around me, you said before reality is reality. What must I assume about that reality?
Well, you don't assume anything about reality. You're simply using your empirical observations from what's around you in order to lead to whatever conclusion it leads to. So if the conclusion it leads to is something like a god or a dragon or something, you basically, it will lead you there. But basically, you can't start with these presuppositions about anything except the things that you see in the world around you, or observe is a better word, because you know it isn't necessarily you seeing them directly. So
you have to presuppose that there are certain acceptable boundaries. So you've determined what those boundaries are. Where did you get those boundaries from? Is that something that was revealed to you by nature itself? How did you determine what the boundaries were of what is acceptable in order to bring into the scientific endeavor? Who gave that to you?
Well, that was established by basically the inventors of science. Like Karl Popper did a whole lot of work on the idea of falsifiability, for instance, that in order to be considered in science, an idea has to be falsifiable. You have to have some kind of criteria to be able to say, hey, this is not true, because really what you're trying to do is falsify it. So is
Karl Popper the authority for you then? I'm not saying that's not a good assumption.
No,
I'm trying to
not
figure out where
saying-
you're getting that, where you're getting
No,
the
no, I'm not
presupposition
saying
from.
he's the authority. I'm saying that has been developed by a ton of people over a long period of time and forms the basis for all scientific endeavor in our civilization.
So where did they get that? I guess what I'm looking for is what's the ultimate source of that. There, as a Christian, obviously, I believe that the physical world is knowable, that our minds are rational, that we can engage in the world using our five senses. I guess what I'm looking for is as an atheist, you're making these assumptions that the world is knowable, that there's there are laws of logic governing our thought, that forming you can form hypotheses. You have trustworthy intuition. There's ethical standards, things we must and must not do. My question is, why, as an atheist, do you bring these? These are all pre-scientific assumptions.
Well,
but
it's
you
not
don't,
just atheists.
But you don't believe in God, right? But
Yeah,
why
but
do
it's
you,
not
as
just-
an atheist, bring these to science?
Well, it's not just atheists bringing it to science. It's
No, I
been
know that.
like, Sir Isaac Newton was a famous one who
He's a Christian, yeah.
developed. Yeah, absolutely a Christian.
And he was consistent. I'm asking you why you, as an atheist, believe.
What do you mean consistent?
Well, that's what I'm explaining to you. Is that as a Christian, engaging in science is consistent with the deliverances of my worldview, with the fundamental beliefs that I hold. God is there.
Mine too.
God is. That's what I'm trying to figure out, Mark.
Okay,
how is it consistent?
If I think that all I've seen in the world, so I'm provisional materialist. So all I've seen is natural things. I have not been presented with anything supernatural or above natural. Only material things I've been presented with. So it's entirely consistent. If I think there's only material things to only use material things in science, I don't know how that's inconsistent.
Well, maybe I can help you out here. So you've been giving me all these assumptions, these rules that you bring into the scientific endeavor, or that you think people should bring into the scientific
I didn't
endeavor.
bring anything into it. It's people gone before me.
Yeah, that's why I qualified my statement. The one that one should bring into the scientific endeavor. There are ethical standards as to how we report our scientific findings. We have to presuppose the possibility of induction and inductive reasoning, that we have valid sense experiences, which you've sort of alluded to before. When we retool our experience, we have to assume that mathematics is consistent. These principles of mathematics are consistent over time. The universe behaves in a rational way. Isaac Newton was very consistent in engaging in, he's one of the finest minds that ever lived, and he did.
No, he wasn't consistent.
He engaged in science as a Christian because he believed that God orders the world in a rational way. That's what Hebrews teaches. That's what, Colossians 2:3 teaches that all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge are hidden in Christ. My question for you, Mark, is for someone who values science, you are bringing a lot of pre-scientific immaterial assumptions to the scientific endeavor.
I'm not bringing anything. It's
you believe that
before me that's bringing it.
You believe that it is right to do this. My question is, upon what are these assumptions grounded?
Well, they're not
Uniformity
assumptions.
in nature.
They're not assumptions.
They're pre-scientific beliefs.
People have put them into the methodology way before I was even born. And you sort of point out, hey, Newton was this Christian kind of thing, so he could do it. But Einstein was sort of believed in the God of Spinoza, just natural laws, as did Spinoza, just natural laws of the universe, and they did science just fine.
Inconsistently, yes. I'm not saying
inconsistently. If the outcome's the same, what does it matter?
Are you serious? I'm asking you. Okay, let me make this very, very clear. And we've had miscommunications before, and I don't.
The reason why I asked that.
Hold on.
Why I asked that, because if I can use something true without believing,
I'm actually explaining why it is. I'm asking for why you, as an atheist, think that all these assumptions are good ones to make, when there's nothing fundamental in your worldview that actually give rise to these assumptions. They seem to be arbitrarily adopted based on the testimony of other people that you're having faith in. But what is at the root of them? What is grounding them?
It works.
It has worked in the past. What makes you think that it'll work in the future?
Induction.
So you presuppose induction. Why?
Well, because it keeps working.
It has worked in the past, but induction makes assumptions about the future.
Do you use induction?
I'm a Christian, yes. I believe in induction.
Okay, so the same time, why would you use induction if it could change in the future?
Do you think that my justification for induction is the same as yours?
No, I think that you think God provides the thing for induction, but God's all powerful, so he could decide the next moment to change it whenever he wants.
Yeah.
So why do you use induction if God could just change his mind and stop it from working?
Well, what does Scripture say?
I don't know. I'm asking you, not
then
Scripture.
Let me tell you. Jesus Christ is the same
Mhm.
yesterday, today, and forever. And it's Jesus who upholds the
Uh-huh.
universe by his powerful word. That's Hebrews chapter 1.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you keep saying,
So you're saying he's
this is
powerless to
this is
change
why
it.
the first scientists were Christians, because they believed that Jesus Christ was upholding the universe, and they thought, unlike the Chinese, unlike the ancient Greeks, unlike the Romans,
Actually, the first scientists were ancient
unlike the
Greeks.
Muslims in the so-called Golden Age, who did not develop the scientific method and did not come up with the scientific revolution. The reason why is because it took Christianity and a fully formed Christian worldview to give rise to science. Now you are respectfully parasitically drawing on science,
No.
which relies on a consistent Christian worldview. I'm not saying you can't do science. I'm just saying there's nothing in your worldview that gives rise to those presuppositions, and that's what you've got to defend. This is a debate. You're going to have to provide a justification for those beliefs. Do you understand?
Okay, so the first scientists were not Christian. They were ancient Greeks, Pythagoras, Archimedes, people
Mathematicians.
like that. They were not. Math originally came from India through, from India came our system of numbers through Islam, and then into. I'm not saying that Christianity didn't have a big part to play in the scientific revolution.
The first scientists were Christians.
It wasn't just. No, they weren't. The first scientists were definitely people like Archimedes, like doing the displacement and things like that. And Christ wasn't even born at that point. So, there's absolutely no way. And plus, they were ancient Greek. If they believed in gods, it would have been Zeus and things like.
Well, yeah, and then
Joel,
so Mark, I'll listen for the sake of argument, and I don't grant this, but I'm saying for the sake of argument, let's imagine that there were pre-Christian scientists, and you can
well,
name
you kind of cut me off there,
right? But what I'm saying is, let's imagine.
So the industrial.
Let's imagine that there were. They could only do it inconsistently. That's the thing that you've got to show us.
No, I don't care that you're sort of going into your view instead of an internal critique. You're going outside of that and saying, hey, they were inconsistent, but they produced consistent results. So the claim that they were being inconsistent is just a claim that you have made that you're going to have to demonstrate. So I know that you presuppose that you need Jesus in order to do science, and therefore if you do science without Jesus, it's inconsistent. But what I'm saying is the results are not inconsistent, so that's only your claim. Now the scientific revolution.
Not my claim.
No. You cut me off halfway through.
So the
scientific revolution was done by a number of people, including a large number of Christians. But guess what, Joel? There was mostly Christians around at the time, so that's hardly surprising. Science isn't owned by Christianity, and most scientists these days are actually atheists. If you actually look at the stats,
inconsistent, and you misrepresented my claim, Mark.
How are they inconsistent?
Because they don't have a God who holds the universe together. They have no reason to think that the universe is governed by anything other than random chance. And you misrepresented my claim. You said that my claim is that for an atheist to engage in science, he's going to get results that are inconsistent. You're looking at.
I didn't say that.
Yeah, that is what you just said my claim was, Mark. And that's why that is why I tried to address it when you said it. Because now I'm having.
No, what I said is you're claiming they're inconsistent and their results are consistent. That's what I said. So
I'm claiming that they're inconsistent with their worldview. Yes, and you have to show how they're not.
No, they're not, because if they are materialists and they're doing science which deals with material things, at least to start with, unless you can lead it to something that is immaterial, then they're entirely consistent in their own worldview. And you adding that they need a God, or they believe a God, or they have to have a God, isn't their worldview. So you're applying your worldview to them and then saying they're inconsistent from your perspective, which doesn't hold because that's not their worldview.
No, Mark, you're misunderstanding the position. And I say this very respectfully. This is very difficult for some atheists to grasp, but we need, and I'm not saying it's not because you're smart.
Okay,
because you're not smart. Look, the point is this. A worldview has to ground the metaphysics of a worldview and the epistemology have to ground what is real and how can we know it. The ethics of a worldview have to ground what ought to be done. So what ought to be, and how can we know? Okay, if your worldview cannot give you cogent answers to those questions, you can engage in science, but only by borrowing or stealing from a worldview that is consistent and gives consistent answers to the endeavor that you want to engage in. In this case, it's science. So for you as an atheist, you have your metaphysics does not hold up. It doesn't pass the consistency test. You have no reason to assume a knowable cosmos or uniformity in nature. Your human anthropology or your ontology has no reason to assume inductive reasoning. I say that very respectfully, but there's nothing inside your worldview that presupposes or that you presuppose that naturally gives rise to reliable truth-seeking faculties.
It does.
To simply say it works is to presuppose your conclusion in your premises. And then what ought to be done? Should a scientist lie about his conclusions? I can say no, because lying is a sin. For you, hey, if it works, if the results are what we want them to be, literally there's nothing in your worldview that would prohibit someone ethically from doing that, other than to say we all want to play the same game here. But if someone rejects the game, there's nothing absolute or transcendentally restricting them from doing that. Do you understand why I say it's inconsistent?
Okay, so this is a red herring that you've gone off on the whole morality track, because we weren't talking about that. So
I was talking about three different things.
Let's get back on track.
That's
this
part of the
worldview
inconsistency, Mark.
Like has to grant what is real and how
I
we can
understand
know
that you
it.
don't want to talk about that.
Scientists do that. They grant that the world around them is real, and how do they know it? By scientific inquiry. So you can't. You are then adding, well, you need a God to do that, and you have not demonstrated that. It is begging the question, and you are going outside of their worldview. You're basically saying, hey, their worldview is inadequate. Show that it's inadequate, and I'll start to take you seriously. No, you didn't. You just claimed it. All you did is claim it, and again, you're interrupting me when I let you speak. So this whole thing of what ought to be done, and like science does have ethics within it, we don't take ethics from science. We take it from other places like secular humanism, which is why I said that was my worldview. And I'm not just a scientist for the worldview. No scientist is a scientist of their worldview. They will all have other things in order to tell them what is right and wrong and what we should do. It doesn't enter into it. So this is a complete red herring. It's basically going, well, this works. They can find out things about the universe, but they're inconsistent because I believe in a God. No one cares that you believe in a God, Joel. No one cares. Wow. Show it. Demonstrate it.
Wow. Mark, that's an incredible example of misunderstanding someone's position. Never did first of all, I'm not arguing against science. I don't know if you understand that. I'm not arguing against science. I'm saying that science is good and it's derived from the Christian worldview, and it's only consistent with the Christian worldview. You as an atheist need to explain how your metaphysical and moral or ethical and epistemological scheme naturally gives rise to the preconditions of science. You are stealing from the Christian worldview and not acknowledging it, because you're assuming uniformity in nature, that you can have knowledge about the future when you can't possibly have knowledge about the future given your worldview, that you can have certain knowledge at all when given your worldview, you simply cannot have certain knowledge whatsoever. All you can have is provisional.
Induction. I already told you that. Induction.
You have to assume induction. Thank you. That's the one I was missing. Right. You have to assume that induction is possible when you don't believe that you're made in the image of God. Hold on.
Why do I have to assume I'm made in the image of God to have induction? If induction keeps happening and you grant induction, you validate it. But it doesn't matter.
Yes,
it doesn't matter. No, it doesn't. Because
if
there is induction and induction works, I believe that induction is or the fact that induction works is just displaying a property of the universe, that it keeps occurring in the same deterministic patterns and not random, deterministic. You're basically saying, well, that comes from God. Prove that it comes from God before you actually make that claim, because as far as I can tell, you have got nothing to show that.
You couldn't ask the question. It's called the impossibility of the contrary, Mark. You have to assume that God is there. You have to tacitly endorse God being there to even ask the question, to even investigate it scientifically or otherwise, morally or logically. If you assume the Christian worldview, you will get the preconditions of intelligibility, because God is there and God cannot deny himself, and God says, do not lie. If you arbitrarily rule God out from the beginning, you are now left with a worldview that cannot give rise. And this is what I so desperately want you to understand, that your worldview does not give rise to the preconditions of scientific inquiry. And before you cut me off, because I know you want to, think about induction for a second. Induction assumes in uniformity in nature, those two go together. One is a reflection of our mind, the other is a reflection of the world.
Yes.
Induction assumes, and uniformity in nature assumes, that unobserved cases will be in the future similar to observed cases. Unobserved cases and observed cases. You have no ontology, no metaphysics that connects unobserved cases to observed cases. To say it just works is to beg the question. It's to say it is true. That's how we know it's true. The very thing that you are assuming is the thing that you're claiming is your ground for assuming it. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to this channel. Here's a video that you should watch next. And if you really want to take your learning further, you need to know about the Hammer and Anvil Society, our premier discipleship community for Christian men. Learn more at thethink.institute/society. Until next time, I hope it made you think.